ISIS believes that their evil and demonic acts are holy. There's no better authority on this sick mindset of jihad and what it means for the world than Dr. Michael Youssef. Dr. Youssef is the founder and president of Leading the Way Ministries in Atlanta, Georgia. You see his great programs here on TBN every week. He's also the author of several best-selling books, including his latest, The Barbarians Are Here. I caught up with Dr. Youssef recently at the White House, where we discussed the book, Christian persecution, and what ISIS is doing in your backyard. Take a look. Dr. Youssef, thanks so much for joining us here on the Watchman.
Thank you so much. Good
at
to be
the
with
White
you.
House, where you just had a meeting with some Trump administration officials. We're glad to hear that. And you're also here for a summit in D.C. on Christian persecution.
Yes.
We're going to talk about your great new book, The Barbarians Are Here. But Dr. Youssef, if you can, talk a bit about this summit on Christian persecution, such a big issue for us.
I really tip my hat to Franklin Graham, who used the resources that he has at his disposal and the connections around the world to bring these Christian leaders from 136 countries, trying to highlight the plight of the persecution of Christians around the world. Vice President Pence came and he gave a very moving speech and really committed the administration to helping the persecuted Christians around the world. This administration, I think, gets it. For the first time, I don't think previous administrations of any political stripe got it as much as these people do. And I'm so grateful for them. I've talked to some of the leaders inside that building, and they really understand the problem. It's very, very important that we get the attention of the government, attention of Christian leaders. There's so many Christian leaders in America, and they said, oh yeah, isn't that so bad? And then they fold their arms as if nothing. They're not doing what needs to be done. Pray for the persecuted. Give to support those ministries that are working with the persecuted.
This is the issue of our times, the rise of jihadism, radical Islam. You write about it so eloquently in your book, The Barbarians Are Here. And one chapter in particular, really in the beginning of the book, Doctor, really caught my attention right away. You talk about our exile here in the West. When I think of exile, I think about the Babylonian exile, the Jewish people.
Yeah.
Describe that. What do you mean by our exile here in the West?
Well, in a sense, this is where my inspiration came from history. When you see it happen again and again and again, not only as we see it in the book of Jeremiah in the Old Testament, when God said to his people, turn to me, and get back to biblical faith, and they refused. And finally God says, okay, I'm taking my hands off, and the Babylonians came and took them into exile. Babylonians are the equal of our terrorists of today.
And you say in the book, history repeats itself.
It repeats itself. And it happened again in the 7th century when Christians in North Africa, who, by the way, comprised about 90% of the population, when the Arab invaders came. Yeah. And because they would not stand up for biblical truth and said, well, you know, God can still speak authoritatively and so forth. And they bought into that heresy. Islam came within 35 years. All of these thousands of churches turned into mosques. And so here we are, we're repeating that same mistake. Whenever the Christian faith goes down, a vacuum is created. And throughout the last 1400 years, when that vacuum is created, Islam must fill it.
You have a unique background, obviously, born and raised in Egypt, in a Muslim culture there in Egypt. Talk about how your experiences there as a young man, and you saw the likes of the Muslim Brotherhood up close. How did that kind of help shape your worldview about the enemy we're facing right now?
Well, we always lived under that threat. In fact, I remember one time in the 60s, even though Nasser, at the time the president of Egypt, put them in prison and so forth, extremists were going around and putting the letter N, meaning Nasserite, on the Christians' homes, so that when the time comes, they said, we come in and behead you first. And so there was always that tension, always that, and it ebbs and flows depending who's in power. And I really commend the Egyptian government of Sisi right now. They're trying very hard, but this is so insidious. And it's so pervading in all of the provinces and all
the Brotherhood,
the institutions.
ISIS now,
yes,
ISIS
exactly.
affiliates.
Yeah. Well, you see, the Muslim Brotherhood president Morsi brought these terrorists from all over the world during the 12 months rule. He brought them from Yemen, from Libya, from Afghanistan, and he put them in the Sinai desert. And he looked at his army chief and he said, "Don't you dare turn on me, because I can have them destroy the army." And that's what's happening now. He did it then, so the army said, okay, we're going to help you out. And they put them under house arrest. But now they've been battling since 2013. This ISIS that is bringing weapons and armaments from all over the world into Sinai. And then, of course, they're supported by Hamas from Gaza, the tunnels where they're bringing all kinds of weapons. And so this is a very precarious war. It's not going to be overnight.
Yeah, and the Brotherhood is the granddaddy of them all when it comes to modern day Islamic jihadism, Dr. Youssef. Talk about Egypt being kind of a bulwark against Islamic terror there, and I take it over the border. You mentioned the Sinai, Gaza, to Israel. Where does Israel fit in this battle for Western civilization that you talk about in your book, The Barbarians Are Here? Where does Israel fit in that?
The worst thing that could happen if you get Islamists from south into Gaza, Hezbollah in the north, and start marching on Jerusalem. Guess what? The president of Turkey, who fancies himself as a caliphate himself, and so it's really kind of leadership war. They're fighting for that. He's now calling upon the Muslims to march on Jerusalem. And I thought, what a predicament you put the Israeli government in if that ever happens. And so we need to keep praying for the peace of Jerusalem, because Israel is really the canary in the coal mine. I remember growing up, they used to have a motto that goes like this: we're going to finish Saturday, and we're going to come back and finish Sunday. We're going to, first the Jews, then the Christians. I remember one guy saying to me, well, I didn't come back to church because I couldn't get a good parking space. Give me a break. Christians are dying in the Middle East and in Pakistan and in Indonesia, suffering for Christ. And you're worried about, and we have become so pampered and in our comfort zones. And I pray that God doesn't have to resort to the point of putting us really, we're already in exile, but really bring that exile into the forefront.
Thanks again to Dr. Michael Youssef for a great interview, and be sure to pick up his book, The Barbarians Are Here. It is a must-read for such a time as this.